Ah, a fat, furry cat. That's evident. I have a friend on the Bahai Forums site called Immersed. Immersed thinks that she can discern the evident meanings in the Bahai writings with great accuracy, which is true. What is evident for Immersed at a given moment is what is evident for Immersed. But is evident for Immersed a useful thing to know? Could we look for the meaning that the writer intended to be evident for the intended audience? That would be a very satisfying thing to know, would it not? But it is no longer evident. It takes thought and research and discussion, and then self-critical thought. One needs to know about the context. One needs to read not just the words, but also know how those words have been used previously. I say, fat furry cat. I observe myself saying, fat furry cat, and I think, how do I know that the cat inside the fur is fat? It could be a little fur and a very fat cat, or a thick layer of fur and a not fat cat. And if I am thinking about the fat cat or thin cat that is inside the fur, why am I not thinking about the cat that is inside the fat? I should give that some thought. This is self-critical thinking, the opposite of naive assumptions. You see, things are things, cats are cats, but words are thoughts. We use them to communicate, but we can also use them as internal verbalizations of our thoughts that enable us to think about our thinking, to go beyond naive assumptions. Because words are thoughts, the intended meaning of a scriptural passage or a YouTube presentation must be subjective and subject to knowledge about the origin, context, and audience of the communication. A word such as merge in a YouTube video might be laden with a specific meaningfulness if one knows about the debates about institutions merging that have raged in the past. I mention cats and evident meanings because I want to respond to a comment that Immersed made on Bahai Forums regarding my Reading the Signs video about Glenford Mitchell's summer school presentation on church and state. As you might have guessed, I am evidently wrong. Pure delusion, subject to confusion, only to be saved by the evident meanings that Immersed is willing to supply. Immersed said, "You think the House of Justice is quietly and indirectly introducing a shift in their understanding of the coming world order of Baha'u'llah through this video from Glenford Mitchell. Immersed calls that circular reasoning. You believe because you know it's true, and you know it's true because you believe it's true, without any real evidence or data." But that's not the case. I presented evidence. There may be more ways of reading the evidence, but it is not evidence-free. I think my reading of the evidence is very plausible. Others may have other readings, and I would be interested to hear them. Immersed doesn't explain how he or she reads the evidence. Then Immersed lists my 3 false assumptions, which I'll get back to later. So let's quickly review the evidence in my previous video. In April 1999, the Universal House of Justice was describing a campaign of internal opposition to the teachings, using internet to sow the seeds of doubt about the faith's teachings. Persons technically trained in Middle East studies were asserting, among other things, that the modern political concept of separation of church and state is somehow one that Baha'u'llah intended as a basic principle of the world order he has founded. That internal opposition to the teachings was so upsetting for the House that the Secretariat sent that April 1999 letter to all the National Assemblies. Glenford Mitchell was a member of the House of Justice when that statement was made. In July 2021, his video appeared on a Baha'i-inspired channel, using Baha'i youth as participants and audience, and made at a Baha'i summer school. A boy called Askar asks obviously scripted questions, and Glenford replies, The rulers of the world will eventually establish a world government. That government will govern things, such as finances and so on. That's their business. And he adds, the government might want to seek the advice of the Universal House of Justice from the point of view of the teachings of Baha'u'llah. Askar asks, if there are a majority of Baha'is in the future, will a world government still exist or not? And Glenford replies, yes, because Baha'u'llah says there will be a world government, and that's part of the divine process. The fact that there's a Baha'i community doesn't necessarily mean the Baha'i institutions will be running the community as governments. So that's a world government and the Universal House of Justice side by side in Baha'u'llah's plan. It's the very idea the people trained in Middle Eastern studies were using to sow seeds of doubt into the minds of the faithful, in opposition to the Baha'i teachings, according to the 1999 letter. That's a complete U-turn and a great leap forward in understanding in the space of a generation. In January 1985, when Glenford was a member of the Universal House of Justice, the House wrote a letter called Elucidation of the Lesser Peace in the Supreme Tribunal. It quotes a letter by Shoghi Effendi's secretary saying, the Universal Court of Arbitration and the International Tribunal are the same. When the Baha'i state will be established, they will be merged in the Universal House of Justice. So what is it to be? A government and the House of Justice side by side, because Baha'u'llah says so, or the tribunal merging in the Universal House of Justice, as the secretary says? In this video, Glenford fudges a way around the problematic letter by talking about two processes merging. He has not only done a U-turn on the position of 1999, he has provided Bahais, who may encounter that merging letter, with a way of not taking it literally. He has made a logical buttress for the position that the concept of separation of church and state is one that Baha'u'llah intended as a basic principle of the world order he has founded. That's the evidence, in short. Glenford Mitchell, 2022, is teaching the Baha'i youth and community something that was an internal opposition in the mind of the Universal House of Justice in 1999. There are two readings of this that I can see. Glenford Mitchell and those who helped him with the video are now in opposition to the Baha'i teachings. Or, the Universal House of Justice has grown in understanding of the Baha'i teachings in recent years and has been using speakers such as Glenford and perhaps encouraging some of the Baha'i authors I cited to signal the change to the community. I rule out the first. I think that anything Glenford Mitchell says on a scripted occasion will have been discussed and approved first at the ITC or perhaps the Universal House of Justice. This is not to say that Glenford speaks with any personal authority, but he must be aware that his words will have a wider effect on the community than a random Jack or Jill summer school class, and he is a careful, conscientious man. Immersed then says that I made 3 false assumptions, which you can read on the screen. That the House of Justice would passively, indirectly, and secretly introduce a change in the understanding of the future world order of Baha'u'llah. But that's not my assumption. What is passive or secret about it? 2, that the words of a House member, present or past, have any authority whatsoever when they speak from their own understanding. Immersed is knocking down a straw man, since neither I nor Glenford nor anyone else has attributed authority to the words of a House member. We do expect them to have information not known to us about the thinking and plans at the World Centre. Supposed assumption 3, that the House would consider changing something revealed in the explicit text. Immersed is confused here. The House says the divinely inspired legislation of the House of Justice does not attempt to say what the revealed word means. And it also says that it can change its mind when presented with new information. The new information might even come from persons technically trained in Middle Eastern studies. or from 100 other sources, from a new manuscript, for example. When the Universal House of Justice changes its mind, that does not involve changing something revealed in Baha'i scripture, because its former statement and its new statement do not attempt to say what the revealed word means. In contrast, the interpretations of the Guardian become interwoven with the scripture itself and cannot be changed or abrogated. Well, that's it from me, except I would like to mention some good YouTube content from Sovaida Maani. She has a series called Reimagining Our World, and her latest episode is an introduction to the work of the world history expert, Arnold Toynbee. The link is in the description section below this video. I would also like to mention Violetta Zein, a star of Baha'i content on YouTube, with her series on The Guardian, on the Clearwater Bahai site. I'll say goodbye with a short clip showing Violetta's wonderful style.
1920 to 1921, Shoghi Effendi in Oxford. I love this part of Shoghi Effendi's life. You're going to see him recover in France from exhaustion, from being Abdul Baha's secretary for 18 months in Haifa, and the fast-paced life he led that just drained all the energy from him, and his grandfather sent him to France. You're going to see him arrive in England and love England, love the English Bahais, fall in love with Manchester. It's a huge part of his life. It's the only time the Guardian in his entire life will experience a big, united, deepened, enkindled, active Baha'i community. It's an extraordinary part of this section. And of course, you're going to see him as an ardent student, a passionate, motivated, on fire student and tennis player. So let's get started.